check.
Yep.
So,
more or less, we're starting now.
yeah, we're live. Hello, everyone, and thanks again for joining us on our fifth episode of SIP Chronicles. We have a pretty interesting guest with us tonight, our whatever time zone you're in, I guess. We have Dave Horton, who is after of Drachtio, like how you call it, framework, or yeah. And he also has his new creation to present called Jambonz. Sorry, Dave, I pronounced it.
Yes.
I'm still learning. Sorry, you're muted, Dave. Dave, you're muted, looks like.
Okay, sorry about that.
And also we have Giovanni Maruzelli, who is one of our hosts, and also have Denis Alexeytsev, who is also helping us to host this little show. So I guess let's get started. And one of the questions I got from Dave is about why are we doing this and what's the idea. And I guess I could just publicly answer this. Is we're basically trying to connect communities who are solving like similar problems from different angles. So a lot of it is kind of self-serving. How we discover a lot of people with the similar ideas or different ideas on the same problem, and it kind of helps us to move forward with what we develop. And also we hope it's in general helpful for the community of those people from different projects.
And this episode will be very, very interesting because we have with us Dave Horton, that is the founder and the original developer of the Drachtio. Then he will tell how to pronounce better. But I pronounce the Drachtio project. That is a very interesting new SIP server. So SIP proxy, it does the same thing that OpenSIP and Camelio do, but is written in JavaScript and is able to integrate seamless with other web infrastructure. So it's very, very interesting. And this is like an established project that is in production in many places. And Dave will also speak about his new project that is CPaaS. So the platform as a service, communication platform as a service, and that's as a very nice name, like a Jambonz, like the things that you put into the sandwich, at least for me. But now, without any other ado, I leave the word and microphone to Dave Horton. Please, Dave, step.
All right. Well, thanks very much for the introduction. It's fun to be here with you guys and answer questions and talk about what I've done and learn about what other people have done. And I really liked the part where you talked about people taking different solutions to the same problems. And it's kind of very interesting in the open source community that way. So probably I took different solutions to some problems, and in some senses, maybe there was something new, and in some senses, maybe I missed some things. So it's always kind of fun when you work alone to emerge and show something to people, and they may say, well, that's great, but there's actually a better way to do it. So I'm open to those kinds of analogies as well. I thought I would start by telling a little bit about the story of Drachtio and how it came about, which is also sort of my story of how I got into open source. And I find it very interesting how people, found their way to open source. A lot of times people get hooked onto a project that was maybe commercial or with a university and get spun off, and they kind of get spun off with it, or maybe they were always doing open source. My story is a little bit different. I was a commercial developer and in telecom since the late 1990s. I worked for AT&T Wireless in the late 1990s. I actually started with the company when it was Macaw Cellular before that, and it became AT&T Wireless. So those were early days for me, and I was just sort of learning what telecom was. Subsequent to that, I joined a very small startup in the Boston area that was doing sort of programmable adjunct switch kind of logic, because that was all you could really do in those days. There was no great way to hook into these systems. IN was a thing that was sort of just coming. So people would buy these programmable switches, and you were selling to carriers. That was really, those were the glory days. Carriers had more money than God, really. So you were building these systems. We were a very small company. I was like the VP of engineering. I started when the company was small. After a few years, it got sold, and it was the owners of the company made a lot of money. But I didn't make much money. And so this is a common experience, I think, for a lot of people in startups. They think they're going to get rich. Now, I think a lot of startups are actually based on getting a lot of young people to work very hard thinking they're going to get rich. So I came out of that experience thinking, okay, well, I put so much into this and I didn't get that much. I probably I ought to start my own company, because that way I'll get rich. That way I'll get rich. So so I started a company, and it was a good time because this was the early 2000s. So packet switch networks were just coming, and carriers were looking to make major investments to overhaul their networks and take everything to SIP. And a bunch of companies got funded at that time, companies like Broadsoft and others, and my company, which was called Pactolis, to help them do that. And we built software solutions, SIP application servers, media servers, and some applications on top of that. And off we went trying to sell to carriers in the early 2000s. Anyway, for a while, it went pretty well. We got to about 10 million in revenue a year. We got to about 45 employees. Things were just going swimmingly. And then the last Great Recession hit. I mean, it's really interesting to me to be talking about this during the new recession, because I'm having nightmares, cold sweats, because the last Great Recession almost killed me. So our company, unlike this recession where communication is the thing and pretty much everybody's kind of making their way through, in the last recession, not the case, and our customers stopped paying their bills. We went from 45 people down to a dozen. We were really struggling. We had taken a bunch of VC money, and what was worse, we had taken some VC debt, and that our banker wanted us to liquidate the company and pay him back, which we had no choice but to agree to do. So we had a fire sale kind of outcome, all staged. And then at the last minute, I was able to make a sale for about $1 million, which was exactly what we owed the banker. And so we paid him, and we were able to keep going.
That's cool.
Now, this was great. Yeah. Briefly, for about 10 seconds, it was great. Until I went, because then I went back to my VC partners, and I said, looks like, we're going to build this again from the ground. And we had done another lesson for those of you out there. We've done a lot of rounds. So I was so deluded that I did not own any of the company anymore. I was essentially an employee. And I said, listen, I'm not going to do that unless we recapitalize the company. And I lost that argument. And I was so angry about it that I just walked out of the company. So in my mind, I had saved the company, but I just walked away from it. They were very angry with me when I walked away. And so I left the company, and that wasn't great. I wasn't sure what I was going to do. And at about that same time, and when I say about that same time, I mean at the same damn time, my wife said she would like a divorce. So that happened. So I had, in a short order, kind of cleared the decks completely of almost everything going on in my life. Very nicely, leaving a lot of room for possibility. But I had some problems too. I mean, I didn't have a job, and I had a non-compete that sort of seemed to prevent me from actually working in the only industry I had arguably any skills. So I did two things at that point. First, I decided to go on sabbatical, and I moved to Wales, which is where I wrote Drachtio. And I moved to Wales because I love Wales, because I love rugby, and I had gone there in my youth and played rugby, and I really wanted to move there. So me and my daughter, we moved there. And because I couldn't immediately do work in VoIP, I started picking up kind of web development. And so I got very interested and intrigued with Node.js, and Express was the middleware framework back then. And I started using it, and I found that I was really enjoying it. And then I started thinking of applying those patterns to voice over IP. And that's what Drachtio came out of. I had built on a commercial basis SIP application servers. Now I wanted to do it on an open source basis, but I wanted a fresh start. And I decided to do it with this Node.js framework that I like so much. Now, I still built a SIP server written in C++ that was going to be a high performance SIP server, because I did not believe that people wanted to deploy JavaScript-based SIP servers, or at least carriers and serious communication service providers. I thought of these people like to deploy network elements that are fairly scalable. They know where they are, they manage them, and so forth. But so I built a SIP server engine, and then a framework that you could connect to it and control it via JavaScript applications running in Node.js. And so the SIP server engine would be just sort of a big dumb thing without any application logic, and the framework would let you control it, but it would let you do things that were so simple in something like Express, add headers to an HTTP response, right? How easy is that? Well, try doing that in some of these other products. It's actually, you got to dig in a little bit to do it. So I wanted to bring some of that ease of use to the VoIP industry, and that's sort of what Drachtio sort of came about as. So that's kind of my story. What I thought I would do is kind of try to give people a really basic sense of what Drachtio looks like if you're looking at using it. And so I maybe do a little screen share here to try to accomplish that. And of course, feel free to jump in with questions at any point in time if you.
I have directly a way to interrupt you,
Mhm.
and I want you to do me a favor. Maybe it seems disingenuous, but it's honest. Can you give just 3 minutes about what is Node, how it works, and what is his role into the general ecosystem?
Yeah, good question. So,
I mean, I think that at least for me, but maybe many of our or the people that will watch this episode as pretty familiar with FreeSWITCH, Asterisk, OpenSIPs, Camaleo, but maybe they have no idea, like me, about Node and those frameworks that I know that works for web.
Yeah, it's a good question, because and honestly, my initial perception back when I first came upon this was, well, JavaScript. I mean, JavaScript is a little language we use in the browser. What's that doing on the server? That doesn't make sense. But when we say Node.js, really we're talking about a server-side implementation of Node that's running fundamentally on Google's V8 JavaScript engine. So we're really talking about Java's V8 JavaScript engine. And that, I think, was really sort of the game changer in terms of performance characteristics that made it suitable for running workloads on server-side computers. And so it's JavaScript that you're writing. Some people will love it, some people will hate it, of course. But it's running on a pretty powerful engine now, and that was a real difference when that came along. So many people may still have their minds in the past where it was like, well, that's kind of a little scripting tool for the client, but you would never run that on a server. You can, and it performs really well, is what I would say about that. The ecosystem, it has its own ecosystem around it, just like, for instance, Python does. And so It's got a modular kind of framework where it's very easy to use third-party, third-party frameworks or libraries and bolt them in. And so the ecosystem is sort of maintained on NPM JS. And on there, you can search for, any modules to do everything. So when you talk about a lot of other projects in the VoIP space, you'll find that they often have to invent their own scripting language, or they invent their own this, that, or the other. When I write applications, I just go to npm.js and pull down something that somebody's already done. So there's definitely a lot of sort of standing on people's shoulders in this environment, because you just don't have to invent stuff that that someone else has done, and it's very easy to find it, and it seems to be high quality. My experience is it seems to be high quality stuff. This is another thing that really changed in my perception over the past 20 years. When I was doing commercial stuff, I mean, back in early 2000, I probably briefly looked at some open source stuff, and it all, at the time, it was early days. It was all like, it all felt like someone's project, a university project, and you would download it, it wouldn't be documented, it wouldn't work, you'd struggle with it. And boy, it's really amazing how far open source has come now in terms of third-party components that you can really trust and well-tested and so forth. Anyways, that was too long of an answer to your question, but that's sort of what Node.js
maybe I can add to it a little bit, because the advantage also of this Node.js is that you expose the whole voice over IP platform and protocols to the web developers that don't even actually need to know about how the VoIP protocols function, and they can stay in their own domain that is very known and common to them. And there are way more web developers outside as VoIP developers, so this is also a huge advantage.
Yeah, I would say exactly. That's what I'm attempting to do, and I haven't decided myself if I've been successful or not. But the reality is, a lot of, and I love all the open source VoIP projects. I'll never say a bad word about any of them. They're really fantastic. And many of them do stuff that Drachtio doesn't do. And many of them are better choices than Drachtio, depending on what you want to do. But generally, when you get into the VoIP world and you decide to take on learn one of these projects and deploy it, you're gonna be at that for a while. The learning curve's pretty intense, and you're gonna find that all that stuff you knew maybe on the website starting to fall into disuse. It's really hard to be an expert in both. Mm-hmm. So with Drachtio, I was trying to make it so that the VoIP stuff is a little more accessible for a web developer, and you don't have to sort of leave your roots as a web developer. Because there's all, it's tough. There's so many projects out there all of us would like to be up to speed on. We just don't have the time. The other thing I would say about Drachtio, its vision is kind of modest in that it wants you to do the business logic. It wants you to do most of the work. It's really just a framework to help you deal with VoIP. There is no database that's anywhere in Drachtio. You put your database in, all right? There's no business logic, there's no database. You use any database, and how are you gonna talk to it? Well, you're gonna go to npm.js and you're gonna download a MySQL adapter or a Mongo adapter, whatever. However you're already doing it in your web application is how you're gonna do it. So it's stripped down compared to a lot of other VoIP projects, is what I would say.
Question, Dave, from my, so what is like user, do you have a user community about Drachtio, or how do you deal with it?
Yeah, no, and it's an area where I would love to do better and to improve. There's the repos that are on GitHub. So all the stuff I've been doing is on GitHub, and it's MIT licensed, so it's use it for whatever purpose. And people put issues in there, and sometimes they email me directly. So there's effectively no user community other than you can talk to me. I would like to improve that. And I love people's ideas on how I can improve that too. But yeah, there's not a lot. But you could go on the drachtio.org website and you'll find a way to contact me, or if you're using a repo, you can put in an issue. And so that's how it's been so far. I would love to see the community want to grow a little bit in a couple ways. I'd love to see, it's been a one-man band kind of thing. I'd love to see some contributions. So I don't know if I need to tell people that, or I was just hoping they would show up with pull requests, but that doesn't seem to be. So if you're listening and you think
you have my mailing list or something of that nature.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I would like to do more community stuff, but there's not been much of it so far.
I understand.
So what do you think? More questions, or you want me to just show you a little bit about it? And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but I just want to, if people are wondering, yeah, okay, show me something that gives me a sense of it. Okay, let me share my screen here once I figure out how to do that. Did I just say present? Let's, we're all developers here, so let's just look at some code. Are you seeing my screen with some code in there? Okay. I picked this is just an application I'm working on for somebody. So, I mean, it's just a simple application. It's kind of representative. So for those who are doing web Node.js stuff, this is going to look very familiar to you. It's just the main application file.
People are seeing the screen?
Yes.
Okay.
So for those not familiar with it, then of course, I guess it won't make so much sense to you, but maybe you could follow along. I don't know. It's a simple JavaScript file, and like all JavaScript files or Node.js files, we're including some various modules, including this module here, if you can see the ones I'm highlighting, Drachtio.srf. So Drachtio is the name of the project. SRF just stands for Signaling Resource Framework. That's kind of an IMS-y type of name, I suppose. But it's the framework that's going to let this Node.js application talk to, control, and receive events from the Drachtio SIP server, which can be running anywhere in the network. So all we do is require the component and then create an instance of the Signaling Resource Framework, which we'll use down below. For those that have used like Express and other HTTP middleware, you're familiar with the concept of middleware, and we have middleware too in Drachtio. So here I'm including some of my own middleware functions. And these middleware are going to get executed on every call that comes in. I'm going to do some initialization. I'm going to parse some stuff out of the SIP message as well. In this case, a device identifier, some geolocation. We'll look at the middleware in a second. But basically, the basics of it are pretty simple. We're going to connect to a server somewhere. And then we're going to, and this part is going to look very familiar to people, web developers, we're going to use our middleware. So we're going to do SRF use to use some middleware, specifically on invite messages. And we have an array of middleware that are going to get applied in sequence. And if they make it through that middleware, then we have a handler for the invite message, and we're going to create a new instance of a call session, and we're going to go off and do some stuff. So I show this just to show the similarities to HTTP type of stuff. And if we look at the file that has the middleware, you're going to see, again, it's very simple. Middleware is simply a function that gets passed a request, a response, and a function called next that you invoke if you want the middleware chain to continue. So I've got a function, some middleware called init locals, which doesn't do much other than create a little logger, put a handler in case the caller hangs up while I'm initializing things. I've got another piece of middleware which is going to parse something out of a header. So here we have the request. The request stands for the invite request. If we want to get a header, we can say get parsed header contact. We'll get the contact header. This will be an object that's broken into pieces, including various parameters. And here I happen to be working on a network that's a Cisco network, and you may, not always, but get a sort of device identifier in the contact header. So I'm just parsing that out. And I'm going to just associate that. I'm going to tag on some additional information to that request that I'm passing on. Again, very similar to HTTP middleware, what you would do in HTTP middleware. I have another middleware function. Again, same thing. In this case, I'm actually doing an HTTP request out. So I'm making a post request just to notify that there's an incoming call. So middleware is kind of a nice concept because there's a lot of things you tend to do when invites come in as far as filtering. Like I don't want them, just send back a 603 or something. Or modifying, or searching them, or setting up variables that will come into play later. So middleware is quite nice. And then in this case, then we were calling this actual function to do something with it. In this case, I'm routing the call. It happened to be an emergency calling type of application, routing the call. And we're going to use RTP engine And RTP Engine is a product that I use, and so I built another NPM JS frame module to talk to RTP Engine. And here we're calling offer. RTP Engine has a protocol over UDP where you can send it commands. For instance, you can say, here's an incoming invite that we have with SDP and various things. So we cater up, we get a response back, and we just go down here. And then we're just going to create a back-to-back user agent. So this SRF, Signaling Resource Framework instance, has a few methods, not a lot really. One of them is create B2B UA. So you want to create a back-to-back user agent. This is how you would do it. Create a back-to-back user agent. You give it the request and the response that you were passed, the URI that you want to send it to, and then a bunch of options. Headers. So if we want to, any headers we want to put, we just stick on. So here, for instance, I'm putting a bunch of headers on, and it's basically this simple. We're going to get, the response, when we get responses back, we can proxy those headers back or not. We can say individual ones, or this one is all. We can fix up the various SDPs that are getting exchanged as well, which we do to thread this call through RTP Engine. So that's just an example of a simple kind of back-to-back user agent using RTP Engine with some middleware to parse SIP headers. But it's kind of a good example of what Drachtio is good for, let's say. So that's kind of my basic sort of introduction to, or sort of speed round overview of what Drachtio is. Let me just point out a couple of other things. I'm going to share a different monitor here. And hopefully now you see a different monitor.
While you're working on this question for you, Dave, how difficult would it be to also add RTP proxy support into your
program? I need to look into that. Like I say, I apologize not being familiar with RTP proxy, but as long as it's got some kind of control protocol where
RTP Engine essentially is pretty much child of RTP proxy, so they took our protocol and extended it later. So basically, it's the same version of the protocol, probably a little bit different now, but the idea is basically the same there.
Okay, it should be easy. All I need is a control protocol. I don't know, like for instance, RTP Engine has what they call the NG protocol. And as long as there's some control protocol where I can control it over a network connection, then it's very easy. I could add a new module for that, for sure.
Okay.
So this is, I think if you're seeing my screen now, you're just seeing the website for drachtio.org, which is a good place to go get information. I actually go there all the time to the API page because I'm always forgetting what the API is, which is kind of sad because A, I wrote it, and B, there's only not that many API calls. But so, we saw, for instance, create B2B UA is a method on the signaling resource framework. There's actually not a lot of methods. The API surface area is very small. I don't think you need a big surface area to do what you need to do in VoIP. So I do, UAS and UAC and B2B UA, these are probably all inside baseball terms to web application developers, unfortunately. But B2B UA is a back-to-back user agent. UAC is a client, a client-side UAC, and UAS UA agent server. We can also proxy, so we can act as a proxy. But this website here is, will have details on the various methods. And when we exercise these methods, we're basically creating SIP dialogues. We're producing a SIP dialogue, which is an object, which we then have methods we can act on, like destroy, to tear it down, which will send a buy, or to modify it, which will send a re-invite. Or to send a request within a dialogue. But again, you can see there's really not much surface area to learn, which I think is the idea for me, anyways. Because again, I'm both lazy and my goals for this project were modest and restricted in terms of not trying to do everything for you, trying to do a little piece and let you do everything else. So that's kind of Drachtio. The other thing I would say, as long as we're on the screen, I can talk about some of the different applications that I've built and put out there. And these are applications that are all on GitHub under MIT open source license. I think one of the first ones I did was a SIP recording server. And I did a SIP recording server because I was surprised that people were still paying a lot of money to commercial products that were doing SIP recording. When there's fundamentally no challenge in doing that with open source other than dealing with the SIPREC invite, which you need to parse apart, which has multiple parts. So SIPREC recording server, and a bunch of people have downloaded and gone off and used this, as have I. I've got an application that's sort of a basic registrar, so SIP clients can register, talk to each other, and they can make calls out a SIP trunk. And you can have calls coming in a SIP trunk and DIDs assigned to users and so forth. So, you know, it's a basic registrar. It's not a PBX. Sometimes people come to me asking about a PBX, and then I usually direct them to FreeSWITCH or Asterisk or other projects, because those are purpose-built kind of PBX things. You could build something like that in Drachtio, but why do that when there's products out there that you probably do want to use? But speaking of FreeSWITCH, I work with FreeSWITCH a lot because I do need to do media, and Drachtio is signaling only. It's signaling in whatever application logic you want to put in Node.js, but you got to connect calls to IVRs, you got to play audio, you got to do stuff with video. So I just work with FreeSWITCH a lot because it's fairly easy to control. But I use FreeSWITCH as basically a dumb media server. I don't use any of its other features, and I do so by means of another module that I created called Drachtio FSMRF. So that's the FSMRF stands for FreeSWITCH Media Resource Framework. Again, kind of IMSy, because all I want to do is connect a call to a FreeSWITCH and then deal with things like media servers and endpoints. I don't want to deal with dial plans. I don't want to deal with special syntax that I don't understand or that's going to be updated. I just want to be able to do things like connect a call to a media server, produce an endpoint object. When I have an endpoint object, do a play and get some results back. And all of that, of course, is over FreeSWITCH, ESL socket. But this is how I talk to FreeSWITCH and integrate FreeSWITCH in my applications. And as I've done that, another thing that I've open sourced, and everything I'm showing you is under MIT license. I've done a bunch of FreeSWITCH modules that I found were useful. So these are things I could plug into FreeSWITCH, and that's another reason that I like FreeSWITCH. It's got the plug-in architecture where you can build modules in C or C++, and you can interact directly with the media stream, which for a while you couldn't with Asterisk. Now I understand that you can. So the modules I wrote were a module to fork audio. There's a lot of use cases where you've got an audio stream coming in and you need to let it go on its way, but you need to fork a copy of it and send it off somewhere. This has come into play a lot for me when I help clients who have they have speech recognition or speaker recognition kind of technology, and they want to connect to call centers or get into the voice network somehow. They don't know how to do it. They need to fork an audio stream to do it. My Google TTS is just text to speech through Google. So it just plugs into FreeSWITCH's TTS model, but uses Google text to speech. Google Transcribe is speech to text. And my Dialogflow integrates over gRPC with Google Dialogflow. And I built that because I was interested in building in this application, which is a Dialogflow phone gateway. So Dialogflow, for those who aren't interested, is a Google product that lets you do, kind of conversational type of interfaces for call center and so forth. And they have their own telephony gateway, and there's some other telephony gateways that as a service that you can get. But if you want to run your own, you can actually just build this and run this and connect to it. And a bunch of people have used that as well and seem to like it. So that's it. Okay, so those are just some of the Drachtio projects that I wanted to talk about. Before I move on to the other project, we can.
Sorry, Dave, to interrupt. We have a question from somebody on the chat. The guy asks, Gohar asks if like OpenSIPs have dialog replication so they can scale horizontally. So what is the approach taken by Drachtio to that scalability?
Yeah, that's a good question. Right now, I'm not doing any dialogue replication. So if a Drachtio server goes down, you're gonna lose calls in progress. I don't have a solution for that. I can tell you a little bit about why, and it's an interesting. This is interesting discussion that I would enjoy having with people in the industry. Part of it is a pragmatic sense of I'm one guy, so I've got limited time, and I have to think on every feature, what's the value, and I have to not do things that I would like to do. In the past, what I found working in the commercial space was that we spent a lot of time building, I'm going to call them resiliency kind of features like that. If something goes wrong, let's have everything replicate somewhere else. And we needed to do that, at least to have a story about that for many large carriers. But the reality is you spend a ton of time doing it. So I did not underplay how much time it is to do it. And then if everything's perfect on the day, it works. But you've also written a lot of code, which probably has bugs in it as well that you've introduced. So you've spent a ton of time, and the reality is the perceived value is great. The actual value is less than great because you wrote a lot more complex code. That's going to have some kind of bugs. You've got a feature that's, and I have to say this. Another thing that's been very interesting for me to have sort of the long view, because I'm an old guy. When in the early 2000s, when we were trying to sell carriers to go from circuit switch to packet switch, we had the 5 nines argument every day, all the time, with every customer. Can you be 5 nines? Can you be 5 nines? And we had a story. Everybody had a story. Yeah, we can do 5 nines, and we'll show you the diagram and how it's going to work. Did we deliver 5 nines? No, we didn't deliver 5 nines. We sold around it with our story. But what was happening at the same time? People were getting used to, we were riding on the backs of the mobile network, where people were getting used to phone calls dropping every now and then, and they're still used to it. The reality is our networks are less reliable than they were in the circuit switch days, but people find that okay. And hardware failures we're getting better and better at that. So I just don't have a lot of love in my heart to go spend 3 months on a feature that's really a selling feature to a large extent. So I have kind of a love-hate relationship with these, with some of these resiliency features, I'll have to say. Anyways, that's the end of my rant. But yeah, you're gonna lose calls in progress if a Drachtio server crashes, dies, or whatever. When I build systems for resiliency, I try to make them scalable, horizontally scalable. I try to make them recover from failures, but I never say you're not gonna have a failure. It's more going to be you could have failures. Let's make sure the software is really good, so it's mostly a hardware failure. Let's make sure the blast radius is small, so it's not going to affect all your traffic, and let's make sure it very quickly comes back up. But no, I'm not telling you none of your customers will have a drop call ever again. That's how I approach it, anyways.
Yeah, Dave, and what you would also, Max, if you allow, and I also think that you need to really understand the use case that you're applying the solution like Dave's, and I see the big value into it if you have some stateless service that doesn't require the dialogue state. Then you can really get all the benefits from the Dave solution. And if it's just a transaction-based service that you only need to change a header or two, or maybe add something, some media, and the dialogue state is not that related, or at least not that much, then you really have an advantage. And if you really care about service that has to be in dialogue all the time through whole call, and you have these reliability issues, then you might need or might want to look for some other solutions.
Yeah.
So you always need to weigh out the benefits, the ease of use, the advantages it has, and so drawbacks. And Dave presented this perfectly, saying that if you really have those applications that you really need to run and have these 5 nines that well, whether you really need to or not, it's a different story. But at least if you perceive to have them, maybe there are some other solutions. But if you don't really need this, and there are lots of cases, and especially I can really relate to this emergency service that you show, because we're doing some kind of emergency service, type of emergency service. We can discuss it if we will have time at the end, but I really can relate to it. And yeah, I see the value in being like a slim solution and not putting everything into it.
Yeah. I just wanted to add to what they said. It's also, if you look at it from more high-level perspective, usually in technology, out of three major properties of your solution, you can only pick one to implement. So if it's basically, these days, it's basically security, I think, reliability, and then comes this silence. So it's basically, if you want something to be reliable, it will not be fault tolerant. It will have some faults. But I mean, humanity been doing with it okay. I mean, we're using air transportation, and it's there is no like parachute or escape pods, right? And it would be very economically impractical to equip like every commercial airliner with like backup system to get people out, right? So at some point, it's basically, yeah, we'll just have to make it as reliable as possible. But anyway, go ahead, Dave.
So that was, unless there were other questions from you guys or anybody watching, that was what I was going to say about Drachtio. Oh, and the name Drachtio, I'm at this point naming things that have no reason. There's no meaning between them, because when I had my commercial company, I put a very meaningful name on it. It was called Tactolis, because that was I had a great-great-grandfather that was a shipbuilder in Maine. He built a lot of some biggest ships in the world at the time, and that was the name of his last ship. So when that company went down, I said, screw it, I'm not spending any time on names anymore. So, but Drachtio does have a bit of Welsh heritage. I have no idea how it's pronounced, but I pronounce it Drachtio. And I think it's a Welsh verb that means to drink. So I think of it as to sip, but with lust, with great lust. So that's where the name Drachtio came from. I was going to talk about my newer project. Obviously, I still am working on Drachtio. It's active. I'd like to get more of a user community going, as we talked about, and there's a lot of things I'd like to do. I have a project that I built on top of Drachtio. That's Jambonz, and I guess I can talk a little bit about that now and show some stuff, if that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Let me just, where am I? Oh, I'll just put this up.
Now,
so again,
you can start about with the choice of the name.
Oh, Jambonz. Well, Jambonz has really no name to it. It was kind of a slang term a friend of mine used to use when he meant going very fast, and kind of reckless. We jumped in the car and there were cops all over the place, but we jumped in the car and went Jambonz out of there. I mean, it was kind of like moving fast. I mean, I guess it's sort of like the move fast and break things, but this is more like moving fast and you may break yourself, kind of that sort of speed. You may do yourself physical harm. Cool. I always like that slang term, but it kind of stands for also just another boring object notational system or something like that. So the story behind Jambonz was I was using Drachtio and building applications for people, and really, like I make as my business, just doing consulting, and a lot of it, not all of it, but a lot of it's around Jambonz, Drachtio, and people will need an application along the lines of maybe what I've talked about, and I'll build them applications. And then over the last year, a lot of people were asking me to build applications and who had something running on a CPaaS, commercial platform, communication platform as a service, Twilio, basically, and the Twilio lookalikes. And they were wanting to get off of those platforms. Sometimes, I'm not saying it was always Twilio. Sometimes people were coming off other platforms. And so I would build them little one-off kind of applications on Drachtio using FreeSWITCH for some media. And I started wondering, well, why are they coming off of these commercial platforms, which have generally been quite successful? And there were different reasons. I mean, sometimes it was cost, sometimes it was voice quality, sometimes it was a feature they somehow couldn't figure out how to get. But I had the experience essentially of building, and I was only, of course, building the little call flow that they needed. So I wasn't building a whole CPaaS, but I was sort of over and over building little parts of CPaaS-like stuff. And I started to think, this is not that hard. I don't know why, why people are paying, because it's just not that hard. So to prove to myself it wasn't that hard, I decided to set out to sort of build one. So I built Jambonz, which is an open source. It's a CPaaS very much like that model where you've got some kind of REST API and you've got some kind of it's XML or JSON format. In this case, it's JSON web callbacks. And so Jambonz is very much has very modest goals. It's not meant to be a big platform. Again, it's not a UCaaS. It has no business logic. It has a very minimal database. It's nothing but a stripped down CPaaS engine to execute some application logic that you can bring your own everything else to. So when you sign up with a CPaaS like Twilio, they'll do text-to-speech, and they'll do speech rec for you. With Jambonz, you just go to Google and you use their speech rec and text-to-speech, or you can use AWS Poly. So you bring your own speech rec and text-to-speech and you plug it in. Similarly, you use your own SIP trunking. So you get SIP trunks from somewhere, you plug it in. So that's sort of the notion of Jambonz, a very stripped down, very simple, not big at all CPaaS that would give people an off-ramp from a commercial platform if for some reason they're not liking the commercial experience. And I think it's primarily targeted towards two classes of customers. One that would be service providers and very privacy conscious enterprises. So when it comes to service providers, I mean, I know some communication service providers who would actually like to, see the value of running with a CPaaS like a Twilio or something, but their business model would never work paying those rates on any of those guys. They need to have their own thing. So for them, being able to bring your own everything without the markups that come with a commercial CPaaS services, could be very attractive. And then there are enterprises who are really conscious of privacy, who have just not gone into the CPaaS space at all because they can't have voicemails with, someone speaking their credit card number or their patient identifier on a hosted, on some server somewhere that they cannot. They need to run everything, for instance, in their own infrastructure. If they're on AWS, they need it to be, PCI compliant. So they need everything, held closely. But they may want a CPaaS-like experience. So now they can run this in their own AWS VPC and do that. So those are probably the two customers kind of looking for it. So on my screen, you just see the GitHub homepage. So it's on GitHub. Everything's here. There's a link to a docs page, which is probably the best thing to kind of go to if you wanted to scan and see what it is. And if you go under API, you can look at the call control. It's JSON format. And again, it's going to be very similar to anybody who's doing anything with CPaaS. It's JSON rather than XML, but basically it's very similar. Dial verb, say verb, all this, that, and the other. Pretty much everything you need for a voice CPaaS. And we can talk about messaging separately in a second. Let me switch. Oh, yeah. See if I can switch to my other.
That's very reminiscent. Sorry to interrupt. That's very reminiscent of that voice XML, if you remember.
Say what about voice XML?
That as a whole kind of approach, I think might be very reminiscent. I would say just on a different level.
They are following all the same kind of pattern. voice XML, Twilio, Signal Wire,
Yes.
Jambonz. I mean, all
Mhm.
in all, you need to give some primitives to web developers that are building some kind of service,
Yeah.
more or less IVR interaction or.
Yes, they're all they're all doing the same thing, and the thing they're doing is very simple. It's just APIs, and they're all kind of a similar style, and sometimes they're exactly the same. And that's because that's been successful. People actually like that. So I didn't try to invent anything new in that space. It's like, yeah, right. It's those primitives. What's different is you're running it on your own infrastructure, and you're not paying any markup for completing calls or doing speech to text, etc. I'm going to spin up a quick instance of it. This is my Oregon. I'm in the Oregon region of AWS. So there's got nothing running there at the moment, but I just want to spin it up to give you a little bit better sense of what the pieces are and what it looks like. I tried to make it the other thing about this is, because CPaaS needs to be easy to sort of bring in and digest, I wanted to make it as close as I could to sort of a one-click thing you could spin up on AWS. So part of the repos, there's Terraform scripts that will do that. So here's Terraform script that's going to spin up, and it's going to create a new VPC for me. It'll create some new subnets. It'll create a couple instances. It'll create an Aurora database and some others. It'll basically everything that's needed. So I'm going to go ahead and do that while we're talking. That will take probably about 5 minutes or so. So I'm going to come back to that in a second. And so that will appear here when I'm done. Now, let me go back to, I remember where I was. Oops. But as far as CPaaS, it's very similar. You know, you've got conference verb. Probably, you know, some of the differences you can see, for instance, here, if you want to do a say, you're using your own credentials, so you're going to specify whether the vendor's Google or AWS, and you're going to specify the language. So there's some differences from that standpoint. The dial is, again, very similar. You're going to do an out dial. You can have different types of endpoints you can out dial. So you can do an out dial PSTN to a SIP trunk, or a SIP out dial, or you can have registered users. Devices can register. Those are described here. And I just added Microsoft Teams support, so you can dial out to Teams users, or you can implement direct routing in Microsoft Teams and complete calls through a Jambonz infrastructure. Let me switch the screen that I'm showing, I guess. A second.
Yeah, well, that's pretty impressive. I would say I would definitely see a lot of people can use it to build some.
Yeah, so this is just a lot of the projects, but there's one of the repos is an infrastructure project, which has both Packer and Terraform scripts. So there's when you run like a Jambonz cluster, there's a session border controller element, and that handles kind of the interface, of course, to the outside network, and it handles registration, device registration, things like that. And then there's a feature server element, which is more internal. And so there are AMIs to build both. There's sort of two deployment configurations. There's sort of a small deployment. That's the one I'm spinning up now, which will have one SBC and one feature server. But the feature server will be in an autoscale group, an AWS autoscale group, so you can have it scale up or down based on CPU. And then a production configuration would be bigger. There'd be two SBCs, and also the SBCs would split out SIP signaling and RTP onto different servers. And we're using RTP engine as the media proxy on the SBC. On AWS, we also make use of AWS SNS notifications to scale in gracefully. So as a a cluster of feature servers kind of grows during demand, during a high period, and then it wants to shrink, we need to let the calls in progress die up, or die out, of course. So that's handled through some integration with SNS. All those things are sort of built for you by the Terraform script. SNS topic is created. The autoscale cluster is linked to it. The feature server knows about it.
Question for you, Dave,
yeah.
if you may, about this. Have you got any analysis of AWS traffic cost? Because what we've been discovering, like trying to move some of our servers to AWS, the traffic cost for passing media is quite prohibitive, to say the least.
For your bandwidth costs, you mean? Just bandwidth?
Yeah.
I don't have anything. I don't have any specific numbers to share. I can say, this is obviously, this is very early days for this project. This is a new project. I do have customers that have successfully migrated all of their traffic off a commercial CPaaS onto their own Jambonz. And all in, I can think of one customer who's told me he's saving about $6,000 a month. So I mean, it's not a problem if you're coming from a CPaaS, probably because they are running on AWS, and so you're already paying that plus.
Okay, I see.
But if you're not, yeah, maybe it'd be interesting to know. I would like to know more. So about the cost.
Yeah. Well, maybe if you're interested, I can probably share some of our calculations.
Now,
anyway,
one other. Yep. So, well, this I just wanted to show that this repo has, for people to run, to people who want to spin one up, because it's open source. You've got a couple options. Well, one, you can call me and I'll help you, but because that's my business. But if you want to spin it up, this infrastructure, there's a couple things you've got to do. First thing, you need both Google credentials and AWS credentials, because we're using Google for the speech recognition right now. And we're using AWS, we're running on AWS, and we're doing the SNS stuff, and we're also giving you the option of using AWS Poly. So you need both. You need that. On Google, you go on, you create a project, and you create a service account and download that JSON key file. Many people are probably familiar with doing that on Google already. On AWS, you need to create an account, and you get a secret access key and an access key ID. So those are the two things you need. With those, you can run these Terraform scripts. You need to put your JSON key from GCP in this credential structure. So I have mine in here. This is not checked in, obviously. I have mine here, but you would download that key. You would put that here. And then in the, there's a variables.tf file where there's various variables find. You put your AWS credentials in there. You don't need to build the AMIs that are required, because unless you want to, and then you can do that with the Packer scripts that are in here. But I've pushed these AMIs to every region in AWS. So if anybody wants to try this, they really just need the Terraform scripts. They need those credentials in the right place, and they can do what I just did, which was the Terraform apply. And let me go back to that window, which we were in before.
Just a quick question, Dave, on this. How do you expect people, let's say I deployed one of those applications from the image that you're shared. How do you expect it to upgrade it later? Let's say like sometime down the road, the new version is out.
You can, what you can do, sorry, I'm trying to move to a different, I'm just trying to get to the right window here. Oops, sorry, I keep going back to the same window, I think. One more time. Okay, before I answer that question, which of my screens are you seeing now? The one that the Jambonz docs page?
Jambonz, yes.
Okay, yeah, so if you wanted to update later on, what you would do, in the case of the feature server, let's say you had a new AMI, you could go into that autoscale launch configuration and put the new AMI, and then you could you would just scale, so from that point on, when it's scaled up, or you could manually scale it up, it would use the new AMI. That's how you would do that. The SBCs would be more difficult. You'd probably need to shift traffic to one and then update them and then shift traffic back. If you can see my screen, you can see that the Terraform thing completed, right? Are you seeing that screen?
Yes.
Where it says, okay.
Yeah, clear, all clear.
So if we go back to that AWS region, let me just show a few things that it created. Let me refresh the screen. So now I've got two instances. You can see I got two EC2 instances running. One is called feature server, one's the SBC, SIP RTP server. If I go down and look at auto scaling groups, I can see created an auto scaling group for me. And there's currently only one instance running. I can see it created a VPC for me. It created some security groups. I won't necessarily share those. It created an RDS database for me, and oops, no, that's not what I'm looking for.
Dennis, you had some question?
Yeah, I had a question, Dave. Do you also have an option to deploy it in the on-premise environment, like in a Docker or something like this? Because, yeah, for obvious reasons.
The software can be the software is pretty easy to deploy almost anywhere, but I haven't done any work to make it particularly, I don't have any deployment scripts for that. As far as Dockerizing everything, I have not done that. Everything that I'm running, I have Docker containers for, so theoretically it would be possible. I don't, at the moment, love running media in Docker. I find it, I acknowledge that the deployment is nice, but it's awfully hard to troubleshoot, and I am still not totally sold on the network overhead of RTP going through Docker. At
least for the call control part of it, because there are lots of applications that only require simple, for example, number management, where you change the number or something. So you don't need to have all these RTP or media stuff. So it's not a full-blown deployment, but there's a huge value in being able to do just a header manipulation and comfortably, right?
It can be run easily. It can definitely be run on premise. I haven't done anything in terms of scripting out how that gets deployed via Ansible or whatever to make it necessarily easier, but I could run it on premise if I wanted to. I focused on AWS to start with. I would like to be able to run it on other hosted agreement or environments as well. So anyways, the point is it's created all this for you, but let's go back. So I've got this cluster up and running. If I go back and look at the instances, I'll go back. There's on the SIP server, if I take that public address, there's a GUI running to do sort of final configuration on port 3001. So this is the new cluster I just spun up. You log in with admin to start with, and then it forces you to change your password. So I'd change that. And since this is the first time through, oops, somehow I'm typed it in the same place twice. And since this is the first login, it kind of walks me through a little 3-step wizard to configure things. So I can configure my account. Devices can register with this. So if I want devices, well, let me step back. Almost all CPaaSs have the concept of accounts and then applications. Sometimes they call them projects and then applications. Again, nothing different here. So you can have multiple accounts for different enterprises or different customers, whatnot. And as the part of the startup, we're just configuring a default account. You can add accounts later. And so accounts can have SIP realms that devices will register with them. And also a registration webhook. So when a device tries to register, we need to authenticate, obviously, the device with its credentials. But my concept was, I don't want to store your credentials in my database. I don't want to have any private information in my database. So when a device registers, we actually call a webhook, and we give you everything in the authorization header. And it's up to you to do the digest authentication against your database and tell us in the response, should we admit this registration? And that way, whoever's running the platform is not holding any credentials that could be hacked or used by anybody else. So that's why it's calling for a registration webhook here. I'm gonna skip this step for now. The next step is create an application. So the application, again, it's callbacks, web callbacks. So just like all of the other CPaaS, you're gonna put in a callback for when an incoming call arrives and a callback to get status events. You can do a post or a get. The endpoint can be protected with HTTP basic authentication if you want or not. And here's where you choose, you're providing the speech, you're bringing the own speech. So you can choose if you want to use Google or AWS for the speech. You can choose the language. You can choose the voice. And of course, those will be sort of vendor dependent, whether I choose AWS. So you get, you're using your own speech credentials. Same thing with speech recognition. We do use Google in the speech recognition, and then you can pick any language that you want that Google supports for the speech recognition. Finally, configure a SIP trunk. So you are probably going to want to receive and send calls to your SIP trunking vendors. You probably can't see this, but here it tells you the IP address of the SBC that you need to go tell your SIP trunking vendors to send the calls to. And then as well, you can add their IP addresses here and whether it should be used for inbound or outbound traffic. So you can configure your SIP trunking vendors. I'm going to skip that for now. But once you've done that, you're pretty much, your CPaaS is ready to go. You've got an account. Web callbacks will be called when incoming calls arrive. You've got SIP trunking vendors established. There's some other settings you can do. So I mentioned Microsoft Teams, so you can enable Microsoft Teams direct routing. You put in the fully qualified domain name, what they for Microsoft Teams, what they call the carrier tenant, I think. Let's see what else. And then you can add more things as you go on. Right now I don't have any phone numbers to find or any SIP trunks because I skipped that step. But typically you would add SIP trunks, you'd add phone numbers, and then you would tie the phone numbers to applications that should get invoked when those phone numbers come in. So that's kind of in a nutshell, Jambonz. Again, my goal is to make it simple, small, easy to stand up, and then get right into testing. I also built a dashboard, so you can have a knock kind of dashboard to see what's going on. Here's a production system that's actually running Jambonz. And we can see we're tracking the number of inbound calls through the SBC, the number of outbound calls, number of calls on the feature server, load averages for every server. You can see they're all pretty low. Memory usage, number of FreeSWITCH channels in use. We can see the response times to the webhooks. So this is the average, which is looking good. It's like 18 millisecond response time to the webhooks. This is the 95%. It actually looks pretty good too. We can see the total number of TTS requests. And we can see the number of TTS requests that are served from cache versus actually having to go to AWS or Google. So we're not going to hit AWS or Google every time we cache TTS, which gives you great cost savings because quite often you're using the same prompts over and over. And you can, and we give you the ability to break the prompts into segments. So even if you have a sentence that has part of it is sort of boilerplate, you can break it up so we'll cache that part of the boilerplate. So it will save you a lot on cost there. So you get kind of a full sort of, or you can have kind of a full kind of knock view of what you need to manage that. So that in a nutshell is Jambonz.
Dave, may I jump right in directly?
Mm-hmm.
I saw you use the Datadog. Can it be also used with Grafana and Prometheus?
I have some. Well, not. Let's see. Where am I at on that? Not yet. It's my intent to do that, to be honest with you. And I'm trying to think if I need to do. I haven't built the dashboards. Is what it comes down to. I got to check. Anyways, I want to add that feature, but right now it's not there. Let's put it that way.
Sure. Yeah. And just for my understanding, why did you go with Datadog first? Because you knew how to do it? Because it was mostly required by the customers, just out of curiosity?
Yeah. It was because I knew how to do it. I'd had a commercial project earlier where the customer had mandated its use, and I liked it. I mean, it is a commercial product, so you pay a service fee for them. And that's why I would like to get to Prometheus and Grafana. But I mean, it's quite nice. It's everything that I needed. It's pretty easy to build dashboards. So that's why I did it first.
Understood. Yeah. I have a few other questions, but I would ask if Max has something else, or John.
Let's see if we have anything on the channel. Oh yeah, we have a question from Amit. Does the project support other channels like SMPP, XMPP for inbound and outbound messages, or is it something planned in the roadmap?
Yeah, it doesn't support it now, and it is in the roadmap. So it's voice only right now. It's not messaging. The reason I did voice first is because voice is easy because of SIP. SIP makes it easy. And messaging is also kind of easy, but every carrier seems to offer a different type of API. So I left it to be second for that. It is something that I'm working on now for a next release, because obviously messaging is an important part of CPaaS, but it's not there now. So it's a roadmap item.
All right, thanks. Question from me on the SIP side. What kind of SIP features do you support? Is it everything that's supported by the FreeSWITCH, or is it some subset or superset? I mean, in terms of like things like PRAC and all those like Ep.5.
That's a good question. I mean, if you look at this, the SIP stack is Drachtio. So both the SBC and the feature server are built on Drachtio. So in Drachtio, the SIP server uses Sophia SIP stack, which is actually the same as FreeSWITCH, as you know. Although I use the NTA module, not the NUA module that FreeSWITCH uses, and it's obviously a different kind of implementation. But in that sense, it supports what FreeSWITCH supports. If you just said SIP, SIP protocol, and it supports all the stuff that you mentioned, certainly PRAC and that kind of thing. At the application level, I mean, there are things that are supported and not supported. So when you say, does it support everything FreeSWITCH supports? Well, it definitely does not support everything FreeSWITCH supports if we're talking about like PBX kind of features. It's very much, this is kind of where its modest goals and vision come into play. It's very much just a CPaaS. I have customers who are asking me to add some PBX type features, and and that may be on the roadmap, but it's not a full PBX. It's really just a CPaaS.
Yeah, in which sense it might be easier for you to maybe see what others have built.
Yeah, I mean, as far as I guess the other thing I would say as far as protocols, I mean, you can connect to it with native SIP clients over UDP. You can connect to it over TLS, which is what Microsoft Teams does. You can connect to it over secure web sockets. So from the outside world, in terms of the SIP options, they're pretty much all there.
Okay, thanks, Dave. There is another question from Amit. He asks about real-time prepaid billing and AAA in general.
Yeah, so this is a good question. Jambonz has no billing engine. That's your deal. So when you build an application, if you want it to be prepaid, that's fine. You do it. You have live call control. So during a call, you can hang up a call if someone through the REST API, if someone's account drains. But Jambonz does not have any notion of that. That's up to you to figure out, because that really is on the application side.
Okay, thanks. Okay. I think his other question on this. Do you have any webhooks to help with that, or?
Well, the whole thing is built around webhooks. So when a call comes in, you get a webhook, and you get a payload with all the information about the call. And in fact, unlike the other guys, you get the entire SIP message if you want, with all the headers parsed out. So if you want a lot of detail, it's all in there. And in response to that, you respond with a payload that says what to do. In this case, let's say dial. And you have a call SID, again, same as all these other guys. You have a call SID, a unique identifier for this call. So if 10 minutes into the call, the guy has run out of money, you can make a REST API call and say, hang up that call. And the call is hung up. But the decision to do that is you, that lives on the application side. You have all the web callbacks you need to enable that.
Okay, Max, maybe I can have my couple of questions as well.
Sure. I think that's all they have for now on the chat. So go ahead.
Sure. Yeah. My question would be: I think there is a big value in applying this framework in a type of IMS environment as an application server, as an ISC application server. I believe, Dave, I think you should be familiar with this type of things.
Yeah, I mean, my knowledge may be a bit dated, because yes, around 2009 era, we were trying to sell stuff to IMS, and they had a very well-defined architecture and for application server and everything else. I may have fallen off the wagon since then, but.
Sure, no, I'll make it more precise. So basically, what a use case could be is that you loop a call through the Jambonz server using the route header. So you get out of the call control, get into the Jambonz using the predefined routes, and then you get back once you have your processing. You get back onto the call control. So you wouldn't actually have clients that register. You wouldn't have trunks, but you would have kind of a loopback thing. And would this be available right now out of the box? Because I think as the way I see it, it's more centered around trunks and clients. But could it be able, or would it be possible to configure the application in this type of scenario?
So tell me again that you're routing a call to it within an IMS network, and what do you want to happen?
Yeah, so you have your call that hits those SCF functions. So it could be like an OpenZPass also, or whatever call control. It could be a FreeSWITCH, and then the call control will put a route header that would point onto the Jambonz, and add a second route header that would point back to the call control itself. So the Jambonz would only have to get the call, do the processing, and then use the second route header, or delete the first route header, because the route header would point to the Jambonz, and then use the second route header to route the call back to the call control. In this way, you would extend, because what we are doing quite often, we have a call control, and it covers like 90% of our use cases, but there are 10% of use cases that are too complicated, too costly, or whatever to get implemented into the call control. So we're using this IC interface to get out of the call control to the application servers, do some specific, very specific, customer-specific or whatever things that otherwise would be just too costly to implement, and then just get back to the call control. And there was kind of application I thought that could be really, really useful.
Yeah, you could definitely do that. So you'd have a call coming in, an invite, it would hit, you'd get your web callback, and you'd see everything about the call, and you could see that there was a second route header. So in your application logic, you could say, great, we're going to do something. We're going to do a play, a collect, and then we're going to do a dial, and we're going to put it back to that, what we just got out of that route header. We won't, because we saw that route header, and we now want it to go back there. We'll just dial the SIP endpoint with that that IP address. So you definitely could do that.
Okay, so I assume that I would have to configure 2 zip trunks or a zip trunk and use this zip trunk to get the calls from the call control and then process them, and then using dial will get dialed back through the zip trunk, and using route header will have the right information. So I wouldn't have clients, but I would have trunks there. Okay.
Yeah.
I understand
Yeah.
how I can map this. Okay, sounds good. And in this scenario, would I need to have SBCs, or I could use straight the feature server, because I'm not quite sure what
still, yeah, you would still need, well, what Jambonz calls an SBC. Yeah, you would still need that server. I mean, I've run them on the same server, but you don't really recommend that. But yeah, the Jambonz front end would still be needed because it handles some of the routing that would be happening in this case. So minimally, you would have the SBC and the feature server.
And maybe the last question from me would be, what are the options for the, or maybe I can even now, when I think about it, I can even answer it myself. So for the SIP trunk configuration, there are, like, obviously with all those providers, there are some different bits and bytes that you need to take care of. And so like some of them use numbers, phone numbers in the www user, some of them use different. So how would you go around configuring specific zip trunk configuration for specific provider?
Yeah, that's a good idea, right? And that's definitely something that's on the roadmap that's not in the product today. So right now, I'm using E164 and I send out through E164, but even some providers, like you say, some require a plus, some don't. So in the end, I would like to have the ability to have some logic, and also, you know, right now when I say in the little GUI configure a SIP trunk, you do it all manually. What I'd like to have is sort of a drop-down list of, you know, some common selections, like you're using Voxphone, or you're using Simwood, you're using Peerless, you know, and you just pick them, you get their IPs populated, and also if there's any specific logic that they need. So it's kind of a roadmap to be able to deal more elegantly with different SIP trunking providers than I do. Right now, it's E164, or else I have to go in and make a change to the code, which is not great.
Sure.
Got another question from Amid. It says he says he thinks that Node.js is currently single-threaded, and he asks if you're working around, or what are you doing to?
Yeah, I would say this is not a problem, and I would encourage people to actually try it to see. It is single-threaded, and there's a couple of things you can do about that. But it's also it's really designed to handle asynchronous operations. So it's not that thread. It's not holding a thread while it's doing a database lookup, or while it's sending an invite and waiting for a trying. It's really well designed for asynchronous kind of stuff, and SIP and telecom is obviously very asynchronous. You can run multiple instances of a node application. So if I was on a server with 24 cores and I wanted to run 24 instances of my Jambonz feature server application, I could. I've not found actually a need to do that, because Node performs really pretty well. So I would encourage people to try it before they think they have to work around it. It would be what I would say.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense.
But generally, yeah, you can scale these. Your Node applications, and Drachtio allows you to do that in two different ways. One way, when I showed the little Drachtio app, we saw that Node app was connecting to the server, but you can have the server connect to a Drachtio app the other way around. So you can configure it so when a call hits the Drachtio server, and again, that's the SIP engine written in C++, it does an HTTP callback to whatever you want that tells it what kind of the location of the application. And that location could be a load balancer, right? It could be a load balancer URL behind which you have a cluster of Node apps running. So you can scale the Node stuff in a couple different ways on modern infrastructure real easily. So horizontal scaling. But I've often found that it performs much better than people think when they hear single-threaded.
Yeah, I kind of agree. That was our we're coming from different perspective, but I've seen it a lot with people concerned about Python, for example, and we've built B2B UA completely in Python now with our asynchronous framework around it. So it's definitely.
But I guess I would insert one other comment about performance, and because I don't want to oversell Drachtio or anything else. Drachtio is never going to perform as well as Chameleon or OpenSIPs, and that's fine. It wasn't really my intent. So I think for people who, and I think that's important for people to understand, if that's the kind of performance that you want to run 5,000 calls, concurrent calls on a single server, on a small server, then Drachtio can get you 5,000 calls, but it's going to be a horizontal scaling thing. And that's not for lack of vision on my part. It's, again, more my experience. That is, if you have 5,000 concurrent calls, you got a pretty good business. You probably can pay for a few servers, first of all. If you have 5,000 calls and you're a serious carrier, you don't like that blast radius of what can happen if one thing goes down. So a lot of people, I hear, I can run 5,000 calls on a Raspberry Pi. I was like, well, I couldn't think of anything more irrelevant to say. A, nobody's running on a Raspberry Pi, and B, most carriers, unless they're doing just one thing, which is no logic, and you're just carrying calls as an SBC, they don't want 5,000 calls on one unit. And if you're doing logic, and you're changing that logic all the time, which you probably are if it's useful, it's no longer an appliance, it's an application, and you don't want 5,000 calls going through one device. So Drachtio is aimed a little bit differently than Chameleon or OpenSIPs in that sense, I think.
Well, there is a little bit of, I think the point of running like whatever number of on Raspberry Pi is to show that you can definitely do voice over IP like in small scale on those devices.
Yeah. That's a good point.
It's not going to boil like your CPU away.
Right.
So yeah, obviously 5,000 calls on Raspberry Pi is not that practical, but like 50 calls, for example, there are a lot of use cases, I would say, in the world that might require something like this. And the thing is about Raspberry Pi that it's very low power, so you can build your device with a little battery that would withstand pretty much anything.
And it's a good question someone could ask is, well, why didn't for the SBC feature, why didn't you build that using Chameleon, for instance, or OpenSIPs? And actually, I would like to have a version with Chameleon. But the reason I didn't was kind of twofold. One is I don't have time to learn something else, unfortunately. And I had a very specific set of features behaviors that I wanted, very, very particular behaviors that I wanted on the SBC. And I didn't have time to learn how to do that in Chameleon. And secondly, it's just an eat your own dog food kind of thing. Doing it in Drachtio lets me explore the envelope and figure out where there are issues, and the product gets better. But I would love to see Jambonz down the road have a Chameleon SBC as kind of an option, which would give it increased scalability. But there are some very specific hurdles that would have to be overcome for that. But I have great respect for those products. And I think for a lot of what people are doing, I want to make clear, Drachtio may not be the solution. Those products may be the solution.
Maybe I'm not sure how much time we have, and I saw one of your videos presenting the Node-RED integration, which I found very interesting. And I'm not sure whether you could spend just a few words about it, or.
Yeah,
let me try to share my screen again.
I'm interested in that too. We had a little chat with Dave yesterday. So definitely a good question.
Okay. Yeah, you might be underwhelmed by my answer, but let me try to share my screen here. I did do a little work in Node-RED. It's not fundamental. It's not a fundamental part of the Jambonz architecture. But when it came to testing and building applications, I thought I want to I need something to be able to whip up test apps pretty quick. So for that, I did build some Node-RED plugins with all the different verbs. So, if you want to, here I'm dialing a SIP trunk. And so this corresponds, precisely to the API, where I can have various dial targets, and I can do things. So all I really did was build some Node-RED nodes to let me sketch out Jambonz applications and execute them in Node-RED. And I'm far from an expert in this. Actually, I'd love to talk with people a bit more, because I think I could do more. So as far as Jambonz goes, Node-RED's not really a part of it, but I want to make it so you can build Jambonz applications in Node-RED. That's the goal. As far as Drachtio goes, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it until I was talking with Max the other day, but I could probably let people build Drachtio applications in Jambonz, some simple ones as well, because using these, the outbound connection thing that I talked about, a Drachtio server can reach out and establish a TCP connection to a Drachtio application. And it would be interesting to think about that being implemented in Node-RED, so people could build their app in a little more drag and drop kind of fashion. So that's my experience with Node-RED. I'm kind of interested in your guys' thoughts on where you see it, and where you.
Well, as I said in our private chat before, I see it used a lot in IoT applications. So, for example, you see a lot of those GPIO and Bluetooth and all that input points. And people basically build applications like they basically take some readings out of sensors, do some processing like filtering, maybe aggregation or whatever needs to be done, and then store it out in some persistent database like log-based storage of some sorts, I guess, or whatever it called, time-based database. So yeah, I was thinking SIP kind of fits into this pretty well. If you could, for example, set up your sensor network, or just a network, one sensor or two, and then can feed the data into a remote server over SIP, essentially. A lot of people could reuse existing SIP networks to also carry on some of the non-voice traffic. Anyway, that's kind of in a nutshell the idea.
Yeah.
But it would be interesting just in general to explore. Do you have any, just question on this, do you have any step-by-step instructions how to set up Node-RED with Jambonz?
No, I don't. I mean, it's kind of a development in progress, because as I say, I've used it for my own testing. So I haven't published this repo into Node-RED, which I would need to do. And I need to clean up some of the code first. So I think I'll finish that, and then I'll publish it in there.
Yeah, if you're curious, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but I can send you a link. I did a presentation, I think, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
OpenSIP's summit, where I spoke about those ideas a little bit more. And
yeah, I would definitely be interested to see that.
Okay, I'll send it to you.
Yeah, and for me, when I saw that, there was that's a biggest deal actually for me, because this would allow for example, for a service provider like us, this would allow us to expose the service logic to our customers, for example, and let them build even a simple application, just change a number, do something. And this is something that we are really lacking. We can do almost anything with OpenCPaaS, with the scripting, with everything, because we're developers ourselves. But there are some things that you need to do for your customers that are just, as you said, just easy and simple, and you don't want to spend time just discussing it and whatever, implementing. It would be way easier if you could allow them to do them themselves, providing this as a service to them. and then they can, even with limited capabilities, and even, for example, just on the call control, no media interaction or whatever, it still be a very big deal, because as we've discussed offline, also this IM type of logic, and especially in the IMS environment, as I described to you, where you have maybe could use the Jambonz with your Node-RED as an application server for specific call scenarios where the call would get out, and then you have this visual environment where you can treat the call, and as you said, it would cover maybe 5% of the traffic, maybe even less, but those would be some added value services that would really be interesting. So you would have your core calls just going through with whatever you're using, Camilio, OpenZPass, FreeSWITCH, or whatever, and like 90%, 95% of the traffic. And then you have your specific use cases where even your own stuff that is not that good at the coding or whatever could do this for the customers, or you can even expose it to the customers and let them do it. So that for me was like just wow, that is something. And we've been discussing doing something like this internally, but we didn't have resources or knowledge about it. And we used Node-RED for exactly IoT projects and some other that we have been doing, and especially having Node-RED with all the ecosystem, like the Node.js, where you can integrate information from SIP and other sources, databases, other REST interfaces, whatever, also cloud services, and you have everything in this Node-RED that is available and through the community. That's a big thing for me. That's actually, to be honest, that's the biggest thing. Well, I'm not a representative of all the customers there, but that was just, I thought, well, we've been looking for something like this like for ages, really.
Cool.
Yeah. And as I said, there's an opportunity also for you to provide it as a service to customers, establish partnerships with trunk providers or whatever, and then also use it just as your own service and provide it to the customer. Make it multi-tenant, so you would have you have a single platform basically covering multiple customers, so we wouldn't have to spin off it for every customer, each and every customer, and that would be a perfect solution.
Yeah, I did design it to be multi-tenant to start with, so that's nice. But yeah, no, I agree. I would like to pursue that a little bit.
Sure.
Like more on technical side, perhaps on Jambonz. What are you using for the web? Is it in JX, or is it just all Node-RED based? For the web interface.
For the web interface, no, just Node.js stuff.
So there is no web server per se.
No, there's no web server per se. In the hosted version, I would probably put in an API gateway type of thing, but because you'd have some needs that you don't if you're running your own thing, API rate limiting and various things like that. But it's just Node-RED stuff. It's just Express.js for the HTTP stuff.
Cool. Well, I guess unless we have more questions on the chats, which we don't, we can go over some of those general questions if you guys still feel like spending half an hour. Something. Giovanni, are you still good with us? You're muted. Sorry. Giovanni, you're muted. Giovanni.
Yes, I'm here, and I will have to go maximum in 10 minutes, but I'm definitely here.
Okay.
And one of the things that we are reasoning, approaching, etc., is those future trunking and alternative to SIP that are coming out, or at least that we're all discussing around RIP and the new proposal for RIP on HTTP3 quick. So in that, in a way, they seems to solve some problems that SIP had, like basically not traversal. And from another hand, they are seems to be, and they are designed to be directly supported by web infrastructure. So cloud providers and Kubernetes and stuff like that. And what's your take also, because you're also, I mean, not a young kid, so no, I mean, like me, we're
Right.
more or less same. And so we saw a lot of history in this industry, and maybe it will be very interesting for our public to know your take about, I mean, an idea of a time frame for overcoming a SIP and having something else that runs on web
Yeah.
infrastructure and
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in hearing you guys' thoughts as well. I haven't, I'll say, I haven't looked into the RIP protocol deeply at all. I did read the first kind of couple pages for it. I mean, it's interesting, of course, that, you know, Jonathan Rosenberg is pushing it, and he was the guy along with Henning behind this, the SIP protocol. So there's a nice kind of historical twist to that, or it's nice things coming around. But the thing that I mean, I look at it right now from a pragmatic standpoint. If you go back to when SIP was created, there was a huge pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that was driving that, and that was service providers wanted to get all their traffic off circuit switch networks and get the benefits of getting onto packet switch networks. They'd all bought into it. They saw there were huge advantages. A protocol was needed, and SIP came along, and that's why it was successful. I'm not sure I see anything similar to that driving this today, to where now you've got everybody with a huge installed base on SIP. I'm not sure I see what that business driver is that causes them to say, yes, let's do an enormous reinvestment here, rip out and upgrade all our SBCs and everything else. I just don't see that part. So I don't know. That's the part that's missing for me. I agree. SIP is, we've seen the challenges with SIP more recently as we start to deploy it in hosted infrastructure, and we want to do it in Kubernetes, and it's not working well behind load balancers, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't know how that adds up to motivation for a huge reinvestment on part of the industry to do it.
Yeah, I would.
I kind of agree about the Kubernetes and the others. It more seems to me the drawback of Kubernetes, frankly, not the kind of inherited flow in SIP in general. Right. And the thing is that what I particularly dislike about that particular approach drafted by Rosenberg is I think he kind of throws out of the window some of the good things about SIP. In particular, I think he kind of discounts the idea of having like two separate paths for signaling in media, and that's, I think, huge driver actually for the SIP and huge practical advantage of SIP if you can run separate your media and your signaling, because then you have pretty much different tolerances for packet loss and reliability for those two paths, and so you can put it build much more resilient and scalable system this way. But that's my kind of. There are a few more points like this.
Yeah, and I think Dave made a very good point, and I will definitely reuse it with your permission in other discussions, Dave, is that the driver for SIP wasn't the SIP itself. The driver for SIP was actually the switch from the circuit switch to the packet switch networks. and we don't have this underlying technology change. We can think, or maybe the argument could be that we're going from bare metal and dedicated servers to more those cloud environments. But I think the drawbacks that the SIP has in those environments, as we've discussed, Kubernetes or others, in any way comparable to the drawbacks that the circuit switch networks had that back at that time compared to packet switch networks. So definitely the justification for the for changing to something else is way less than back then. So I think that was a very good point regarding that. It wasn't we also had, and obviously there would have been some H323 was there as a competitive protocol, but it was just way complicated compared for developers, for seasoned developers. There were more coming from the IP world. And then there was also almost unknown a specific BICC protocol from the mobile networks that there was basically the reincarnation of ISA protocol controlling the IP bearers. So and SIP was simple, was supporting the packet switch technology, and this was the way forward. And now I also don't see, especially given the install base, and even back then it was a huge fight and huge it take a lot of time migrate from circuit switch to packet switch due to the this investment protection. And now but still it was driven by this packet switch advantages, and now we have this also investment protection into SIP, but we don't have a driver that helps to save money or make new business with the technologies. So yeah, it would be, I think it might have the similar fate as the WebRTC, that it is useful in some instances, in some environments, in some situations, but it will not be a replacement. And especially given the also the investment from the mobile networks, the whole IMS, the implementation of the IMS in mobile phones, like in iPhones, in Google, it also install base. So you would have to convince Apple and Google to change those implementations as well, at least for the terminals, and then you would have to convince the core network vendors that do the IMS that is based on ZIP to change to something else. So yeah, it's just way too much, I believe. But for some specific scenarios, obviously, it could be possible, and we can also look at the IPv6 versus IPv4, how long it took for IPv6, and it was to get rolled out. Right. So, and we're still not there for IPv6 at all.
Not near.
Exactly, and yeah. So, and my other point would be maybe that for SIP, I mean, having dealt with it for quite a long time, you can see that the implementations, especially when you're interconnecting between operators, it's just so basic. So the implementation are also very basic regarding the features that SIP supports, even now, like 20 years after. And you have so many misunderstandings of how things should be implemented, how messages should be transported. So it all boils down to the lowest common denominator, that limiting your interoperability or end-to-end experience. And then you would have to deal with the same issues for this new protocol, and either to restrict it to really basic call, A calls B, that was the idea for the SIP in the first place, but then you cannot make that much money out of just a basic call, and you want to add additional services, and then you get into these problems of interoperability, understanding of the protocols, people just knowledge of how to implement those things. So it will be the same struggle or problems for this new protocol as it was for the SIP back then. So those quite a few challenges to overcome.
Giovanni, you? What do you think?
I definitely agree. But I think that more or less we all that are into the industry feel more or less the same. Also, cause in a way when you have some kind of telecom operation, I mean, it's not that you are driven for whatever reason to use Kubernetes or that you have some stopgap because you're using UDP or RTP or things like that. I mean, you're a telco operation and that's it. It's true that if you want maybe tomorrow to add telecom component into your more complex offer, then you can be interested into running it all, so both your whole product and the little communication component that you want to add as a feature product into the same infrastructure. But in this case, probably you will just use some kind of external service like Jambonz, like Twilio, like whatever. I mean, there is no need to force a triangle peg into a round hole. And for this, I mean, I've read both the specification and the new document, the document that is just a couple of weeks out from Rosenberg about the differences between SIP and RIPT. And it's very nice. I mean, you read it with some pleasure because he's I mean, a sweet writer from one side, and from the other side, is very clever. But yeah, the things that lack is motivation. I mean, I don't see how I can go to one of my telco customer, a select or a carrier, and tell them something that I mean will move the CEO or the CTO to sign the check, or at least to do a pilot project.
Right.
I mean, the question will be what's in for me and what's in for my customers, and the answer is very difficult. By the way, Rosenberg proposed that protocol written mostly as a trunking protocol between big operators. And I think that he's thinking in terms of like WebRTC services offered by Google, Facebook, and Microsoft, how they can combine between them and between, I don't know, the kind of signal wire, Twilio, or things like that. I think that the space of application of this proposal by Rosenberg is this kind of space, and probably he see also, I mean, where he can go with his own consulting firm to do this kind of implementation. But as he's as a first person, he doesn't push it for endpoints or for the general infrastructure. It's more like trunking, manipulation of trunks.
Yeah,
Yeah, still, but still, it has a kind of stated goal to replace SIP as a main protocol for doing voice over IP or a voice part.
yeah, Max, I think what would be interesting to see, well, the IETF is open to join, and I think especially during this COVID time, it would be interesting to see their meetings. They should be it should be possible to join them online and to follow it. And another issue is that it all depends also on the available implementations, whether there'll be support, I don't know, from Schulzering, some universities that would provide a proxy or some server implementation or client implementation. And it could also be that it could be something like XMPP protocol. There's not many businesses that are making money out of the XMPP protocol, but it still exists and it's pretty successful in its own ways. So yeah, I think it makes sense to follow it a little bit closer, and to see what would be the application fields for that. And especially, I think Giovanni made a really good point, and I was discussing this also recently, that for example, in the business environment, more and more calls are being done over the Teams and Skype for Business platforms. So it means there are lesser calls on the public networks. And so the interconnection between those Microsoft, Google, Facebook implementations or islands that become bigger and bigger with time would be an issue. But it also poses a threat to a telecom industry. So yeah, if you're invested into the telecom industry and those companies are taking place or share in the communication, especially in the business area where the money to be made, that is definitely something that we have to look after and see how it will develop.
All right. Well, I guess that's unless we want to discuss it for much longer, maybe we could. I don't know. You, Dave, raised some other points like health of the open source telecom ecosystem. So what is exactly is your concern, and what did you want to talk about that?
Oh, I don't know. That could be a whole other conversation. I mean, I'm interested in different people's view on open source. A general question, I guess, is, how healthy is the open source community in telecom? Because I think my sense is, the general sense is that actually it's very healthy, because we have a bunch of projects. People think it's probably healthier than in other industries. But I kind of want to put a counterpoint to that and say, is it really? If we measure the health by the efficiency of capital allocation system-wide, is capital flowing to where it's going to be most productive? Then I'm not sure it's so healthy. Now, as one example, what I'm doing with Drachtio is not much different than what I was doing on a commercial basis. On a commercial basis, I was funded with a team of 45. Doing it open source, it's one person. It's fundamentally nothing different than I'm doing, but the capital does not necessarily flow to where it's going to be most productive. If you look at the quality of open source developers in telecom, I think, we're all biased, but it's very high quality stuff. Some of the best developers in telecom are doing open source stuff. And is capital really flowing to its best use? Are they properly being capitalized such that overall we're producing the best quality we can? And so my view is, I don't think so, and therefore no, I would say it's not that healthy. It's just an opposing, perhaps, view of things.
I see. Well, I mean, I'm not sure if you really can measure open source in terms of capital that flows out, because those kind of parallel universes almost. And my own view on it, I've been through watching the industry for a little while as well as all of you guys here. I think we kind of went through initial, pretty much any other industry. If you look at for example, internet or internet commerce or anything like .com boom, pretty much every industry has this kind of pattern when initially when it's just something very new and cool, it basically jumps up very rapidly, and then kind of very quickly it gets basically pretty much to nothing in terms of interest. So people just move around to some new industry like AI or something. But then if you zoom out a little bit higher, so like for example for voice over IP, that would be like I don't know 2005 where it could where it did kind of boom out. It kind of went from being very interesting to not interesting so much after that in terms of capital. But what I see now, I think it's starting kind of growing, but it's more like slower rate these days.
Mhm.
Anywho, that's kind of my little perspective on
Yeah.
how things develop. But in terms of actual projects, I think we are pretty healthy. I mean, if you compare building something from open source on the voice over IP side in beginning of 2000s, there was only like 2 or 3 options of what you could be using. These days, there is probably easily 5 times the number of projects that you can utilize. And pretty quality projects as well, not just something that has been built
I think
over.
is maybe a little lateral, because what I see is that we have a lot of lovely products that are kind of mature, and we have for what is my impression, a diminishing community, less and less community, less and less people that is entering this arena of open source telecom, less and less people that want to learn, and by at large, less and less people that participates into the community. I don't know if you are now and then checking IRC, but the IRC channels about the telecommunication, I mean, Camalio, OpenSeps, FreeSWITCH, etc., are, I mean, almost dead. There is more or less the same number of people that there was in the past, just that they don't chat anymore. The mailing lists are maybe a little bit more lively, but not so much. I mean, really, not so much. If you compare like 5 years ago, it's black and white. And so I think that um, from one side, open source was pretty an American and European thing. And in Asia, from one side, they don't are not so much interested, and from another side, they probably have other kind of way to interact or to do open source. I know that Tencent, other big giants in Asia, do also open source. It's just that I don't know what and how. And I mean, it's probably two different parts of the world of the open source world, but that I have no um, communication with, and I am into this open source thing. I mean, no, like 20, 25 years, 30 years. No, too much. But so I'm supposed to know. And definitely I see this. And the other thing that I see is that probably a lot of space that before was covered by um, semi-hobbyist or almost hobbyist that were taking asterisk or free PBX or things like that has just dried up and has been substituted by Twilio or some kind of service. So you're no more interested into taking a box, install free PBX or whatever. I mean, if you remember, there was a huge market. I mean, they made money from that, both from selling the CDs or selling hardware compatible or things like that. I mean, it was something. Now it doesn't exist anymore at all. And also all the things that has to do with the mobile, and the mobile has moved a lot of things. I mean, all the small shops maybe they almost don't have any more a PBX, or you don't need anymore it to look like you are a real shop or a real corporation. And that was also a driver for open source telecom. I mean, small companies that has no money but want to look like big companies, or Ava PBX, IBR, something like that. So I think it's a mixed bag, the state of the open source telecom. From another side, I mean, in the last many years, if you look at the market for books in telecom, there are my books and one book of Asterisk, and that's it, nothing else. And if you think all those books, probably have not exactly huge prints. And so I think it's really a mixed bag. So from one side, we have beautiful technology, mature, and that is, industry level and for sure on pair and probably more flexible than proprietary solution. And from the other side, I think that the growth of the base and the community is just kind of imploding or dispersing or atomizing, or I don't know what. This is at least my it's more or less is just now seems to me that there is just OpenShips, Camaleo, and Fusion that have some community that is lively, but we're talking about dozens persons, not hundreds. Don't even think about thousands. So,
might be true, but also might be like we don't know what is the size of that silent, happy user base that would never really bother to like contact you when everything works. In that sense, I really liked to see something that like FreeBSD, they added like little note to the OpenShips port that if you like OpenShips and you want to use it, also install RTP proxy. And then I did not ask them to do it. This kind of came inside. I wouldn't even know about it. So there is a lot, or like I know about people using RSP proxy in DDVRT built in as one of the packages. So there are a lot of those communities that exist, and they do something useful, but they might not necessarily be very interested in giving some feedback unless something breaks horribly. So like commoditization of the technology of SIP technology came to the point where it basically just works. I mean, even for very complex scenarios. Probably maybe some combination of those factors. I don't know.
Yeah, I think I would support that view that the technology is pretty much commoditized, because I don't think there are huge communities around SMTP protocols or mail servers nowadays, because it works on one hand side, and I think, but still for the open source to sustain, I mean, like some of the successful products that they have a mixed type of solution where you have maybe a somewhat limited feature set that is open, solution that is open sourced, and then a more extensive feature set that is a commercial version. And this way you can subsidize the open source development and maybe also gain some community. So I haven't seen this in the voice or in the voice of IP and telecom open source that much, but I think this is where the VoIP community could take a look onto the other open source projects where they have these mixed kind of models. And another thing that might be worthwhile to look at, and I think it's a good idea from Dave to have this integration with Teams, because as I said it, and I will say it again, I see a real big move, especially for the business users. And this is where the business users are basically the ones that are still prepared to pay for voice, because it's relevant for their business. They're making money with voice. The consumers, they don't make money with voice. So we're not using any commercial product currently right now. So there are plenty of services that can provide voice to the consumers. So it's basically the business market that is mostly relevant, in my opinion, or will be still relevant in the midterm. And this is where Microsoft with their Teams solution is really pushing, and I'm seeing lots of communication being shifted to it. And so if you can extend or have interconnection or interface Teams platforms, I would definitely recommend looking into it, because there definitely be some need into customizing some of those things, and see how things will develop on that front. And yeah, as I said, look onto maybe mixed open source and commercial type of proposals, and then also, as we've discussed in the beginning, to maybe provide service yourself and not only the solution. So hosting this thing and providing this as a service completely, as kind of a Twilio thing, where you can may have a more access to the interfaces, to the development, and go deeper into defining your functionalities. So those would be my 2 cents onto it.
Nice. So what do you want to show us, Dave?
Oh, I forgot. Well, we were talking about Teams, and we were talking about Node-RED, so I thought I should just show some of the integration. So this is I've got a different Jambonz cluster running, and I've got Teams here, and my application is in Node-RED. So it's a simple application. I get a call back, and I'm simply dialing out a SIP trunk. I'm going to dial my cell phone. Where did my Teams guy go? And we can kind of see the web callback stuff come back as well. Oops, hello. Okay, just gonna hang up. So yeah, you can do outbound calling from Teams, and here's some of the web callback stuff that you're getting. Those look like status. calls. Let's see if I can find any that are.
Yes, and as we discussed, Dave, and integrating teams with some back office business processes, some, I don't know, Salesforce or whatever through Node-RED or Node.js. This is where I think this could add values to the enterprises, and which Microsoft would definitely not be interested in some of those integrations. And I think this would be a big way for a good way forward, because, as I said, businesses are the only ones who are prepared to pay money. So those would be.
Who knows? Maybe Microsoft will buy Dave's business in a few years after he builds it up.
That would be nice for Dave, I would say.
But seriously speaking, Microsoft done a pretty good push. I mean, if you have not seen, we have not seen much of SRTP adoption in voice over IP, in general SIP for until the basically Teams came up, and then it basically, if you have not watched any lists like Camellia or OpenSIPs, it was basically a storm of people discovering issues and problems and bugs. So it gave pretty good boost to the SRTP and related features in all those projects. Definitely think it was a positive general development that Microsoft did.
My dear friends, I got a
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, okay. Well, I guess thank you again, Dave, for coming
thank you
out
guys.
with us. It was quite a lot of stuff to learn, and I'm sure it will take a little bit of time to process, but definitely hope to stay in touch, at least from myself. I definitely can tell that, and yeah, maybe we'll see you later on our show, or maybe we'll just continue interacting in terms of your projects and all that.
Thanks very much for having me. It was great. Really enjoyed meeting you guys and chatting about stuff. Definitely many things I'd follow up with you guys on.
Yeah, exactly. And as your project progress, there might be a point where would you like to show new features, new possibilities, and this would be a good point to have another session. And as Max discussed, due to this COVID situation, we don't have much opportunities to meet in person during the different meetings and conferences, and this is a good opportunity to cover for that.
Yeah.
All right. Have a great weekend, you guys.
Oh yeah.
You too.
Thank you, Dave.
Thanks
Thanks everyone who is watching us.
Ciao.
Thank you. Bye-bye.